Welcome back, everybody. We're diving deep into Luke chapter 6, verses 1 through 49. But get this, we're going to explore how just really taking our time with every single word, like savoring it, can be incredible. And not just for grown-ups, for kids too.
It's true. Slowing down can make all the
For
difference.
real.
Like, take those first few verses, Lord of the Sabbath.
Ooh, powerful stuff right there.
I know, right? So much we could unpack just from those words.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of unpacking, let's jump right into that first scene. The Pharisees are watching the disciples like hawks because they're picking grain on the Sabbath. So, what was the big deal with that?
Well, to understand why they were so upset, you got to see the world through their eyes. For the Pharisees, those Sabbath laws, they were like super sacred, a covenant with God.
I get it.
And they were pretty serious about how those laws should be interpreted.
Okay, so they saw what the disciples were doing is like a straight-up challenge to God's authority.
Yeah, pretty much.
But then Jesus steps in,
He sure does.
and he uses that story from the Hebrew Scriptures about a King David.
Oh, yeah, the one where David eats the consecrated bread because, well, he and his men were starving. Technically not allowed, right?
Right.
But David was acting out of compassion, out of necessity. And then, wait for it, Jesus compares himself to David, declares, "The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath."
Wow. Bold move.
Yeah,
He's basically saying he has authority even over these ancient holy traditions.
exactly. And it makes us think, right, about how we view rules and traditions ourselves.
For sure.
Are we so caught up in the letter of the law that we miss the spirit of it?
Ooh, that's good.
Because sometimes love and compassion have to come first.
Totally. And that's a message we need to hear even today, right? I mean,
Yeah.
It's easy to get so bogged down with rules and regs that we forget about, being human.
It's true. We've all been in situations where sticking to the rules just doesn't lead to a fair outcome. At work, school, even with our families.
And you can't help but notice that same theme, challenging traditions, it pops up again right away. In that next scene where Jesus heals the man with the withered hand, on the Sabbath, no less.
Talk about a showdown. Right there in the synagogue.
Oh, yeah.
The Pharisees are just watching him, waiting for him to slip up.
You can practically feel the tension.
I know, right? They see this as a clear violation of their Sabbath laws.
I can practically feel the judgment radiating off them. But then Jesus throws them a curveball.
He does.
He asks, is it lawful on this Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it?
Boom. He flips the whole situation on its head, forces them to look at their own hypocrisy. They're so fixated on the outward stuff, they've completely lost sight of what really matters.
Compassion,
Healing.
love,
Yeah.
powerful stuff. So it's like a lesson in priorities. Like sometimes you got to break free from those rigid rules to truly live out your faith.
That's it exactly. And think about the impact. It goes way beyond just healing that one guy.
Oh, for sure.
He's showing his authority over the Sabbath, over all of creation even.
It's like a sneak peek of his power to heal and restore a broken world.
Exactly.
It's huge.
Mm.
Okay, so after these run-ins with the Pharisees, things kind of shift gears, right? Jesus goes up a mountain to pray, and then boom, we get this scene where he picks his 12 apostles.
Yeah, this is a big moment, a turning point in Jesus' ministry.
For sure.
He's moving from teaching and healing to building a team, like his core crew.
Like he's putting together the ultimate leadership squad.
Mhm.
And he doesn't just pick names out of a hat. He spends the whole night praying before making his choices.
That's right. It shows us how important it is to really seek God's guidance in everything we do, but especially when it comes to leadership.
So tell me, who are these guys? What were their backgrounds?
Oh, they weren't all scholars or anything like that.
Yeah.
You had fishermen, Simon Peter, and Andrew, a tax collector, Matthew,
Oh, wow.
even a zealot, Simon. Just ordinary people from different walks of life, united by one thing.
Following Jesus.
In-
Fascinating. It's like a reminder that God can use anyone, right? It doesn't matter where you come from, what you've done, he's got a purpose for you.
That's the beauty of it.
I love that. All right, so the team's assembled. What's next?
Well, Jesus comes down from the mountain, and there's a huge crowd waiting for him. People have come from all over to hear him teach, to experience his healing, and it's there that he gives one of his most famous sermons.
The one with the Beatitudes?
Yes.
Those are like little nuggets of wisdom
Yeah.
about who's really blessed in God's eyes. But they're kind of paradoxical, right?
You could say that.
Like take that first one. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
It's radical, isn't it? The world tells us to chase wealth and status, but Jesus says true blessedness comes from knowing we need God.
So it's all about humility,
Yeah.
recognizing that we're not self-sufficient. We depend on God for everything.
Exactly.
That's deep.
Yeah.
Definitely not the kind of stuff you'd hear in a self-help seminar.
Not at all. But that's what makes the Beatitudes so powerful. They challenge us to see things differently, to embrace a whole new set of value,
Like a new way of thinking.
a new way of being.
It's not just about individual happiness, though. It's about building a society where, like, the meek are valued, those who mourn are comforted, where peacemakers are honored.
Right. The Beatitudes aren't just personal virtues. They're like a blueprint for a world where God's kingdom is fully realized.
That's incredible when you think about it.
Yeah.
But hold on. It's not all sunshine and roses, is it? After the Beatitudes, there are those woe pronouncements to those who put their trust in worldly stuff.
Those woes are a reality check. They remind us that true fulfillment doesn't come from having a lot of things or being popular.
Right.
It's about putting God's kingdom first.
So it's like a warning, like, check your priorities, people.
Exactly. Are you chasing after the things of this world, or are you going after something more lasting, more meaningful?
Deep. That tension between what the world values and what God's kingdom values is something we see all through Luke. Through the whole Bible, actually.
It's
It's
just,
a struggle we all face, a choice we all have to make. So we've got the Beatitudes, blessings for those who are in tune with God's will, and then the woes, highlighting the pitfalls of chasing after worldly stuff. What comes after that?
well, Jesus builds on that and goes on to give us one of the most challenging teachings ever. Love your enemies.
Okay, now things are getting real. That's not exactly a message that's going to win you any popularity contests, even today.
I know, right? It goes against every natural instinct we have to protect ourselves, to get even. But Jesus isn't just giving us some nice-sounding ideal. He's calling us to a kind of love that goes beyond what we think is possible, a love that reflects the very nature of God.
I don't know if I'm ready for that level of love, but I'm listening. What does he say exactly?
He says, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. And he even gives us specific examples like turning the other cheek when someone hits you, giving without expecting anything in return.
Those are some tough words to swallow, especially when you've been hurt by someone. But I can see how that kind of love, if we could actually pull it off, it could change everything. Our relationships, even the world.
It would be revolutionary. Imagine a world where forgiveness and reconciliation were stronger than hatred and revenge.
Think about all the conflict and division we see in our own lives, in our communities, everywhere.
Yeah.
This radical love, it could be the antidote. But it would take so much courage, so much humility, letting go of all that bitterness.
It's a process, for sure. It doesn't happen overnight. But it starts with understanding that we all need forgiveness. We all need mercy. We've all received God's grace. And that grace should push us to give grace to others, even our enemies.
That idea of giving grace, it's so powerful. And it actually leads us perfectly into the next section of Luke 6, where Jesus talked about judging others.
Ah, yes. Judge not, lest ye be judged.
It seems like everyone's got an opinion on that one.
For sure.
But what's the real point here?
Well, it's not about never judging at all.
Okay.
We need discernment to figure out life, to make choices that line up with what we believe. Jesus is calling out that hypocrisy of focusing on everyone else's faults when we've got our own to deal with.
He uses that great image of the speck and the log, right?
It's a classic. You can't miss the point.
Trying to pick a speck out of someone's eye when you've got a whole log in your own.
Right.
It's ridiculous. But we do it all the time, don't we?
We do.
So quick to see the faults in others, totally blind to our own.
But Jesus isn't condemning us. He's calling us to a higher standard, to a life where we're humble, where we look inward.
It's like he's saying, clean up your own mess before you go critiquing your neighbor's yard.
Precisely. And this connects back to grace, too. When we recognize our own flaws, our own need to be forgiven, we're less likely to judge other people. We become more compassionate, more understanding.
You know, this reminds me of what you said about the Pharisees.
Oh.
They were so focused on following the rules exactly that they missed the whole point, the heart of it.
It's true.
Maybe that's what happens when we get obsessed with judging others. We lose sight of the bigger picture, God's love and mercy.
That's a great point. And it leads us right into the next part where Jesus uses that metaphor of the tree and its fruit.
A good tree can't bear bad fruit, and a bad tree can't bear good fruit.
Right.
Such great imagery.
It's simple, but so profound.
It is.
Jesus is highlighting the connection between who we are on the inside and what we do on the outside. Our words and actions reflect what's going on in our hearts.
So if you want to produce good fruit like kindness, generosity, compassion, you got to cultivate a good heart, a heart that's in line with God's will.
And that's a journey. It's about recognizing the things that might be holding us back,
Yeah.
the bitterness, the resentment, the judgment, letting God work in our hearts and change us from the inside out. I love that. Transform us from the inside out. It's not about putting on a show for other people. It's about real heart change.
That's it.
And that heart change, that's what gives us the power to live out these teachings, right? It's what helps us love our enemies, be gracious, judge less, and love more.
Absolutely.
It's like a ripple effect, right?
For sure.
When our hearts are transformed, it changes how we interact with the world. Okay, so we've talked about this heart change thing, but how do we actually put these teachings into practice?
That's where the parables come in. Those
Yeah,
little stories that pack a punch.
they do.
And in Luke 6, we get two of them. The wise and foolish builders and the Good Samaritan.
Classics. Everyone's heard them.
Ed-
But I feel like there's always something new to discover in them.
Always a deeper layer to unpack.
Let's start with the wise and foolish builders.
Okay.
Simple story, powerful message. Build your life on a solid foundation.
Exactly.
Well, one builder chooses rock, the other chooses sand. Pretty obvious metaphor, right? It is. But it's got deep implications. The rock represents listening to and obeying what Jesus says. The sand is ignoring his teachings.
So it's not just about hearing the words. It's about taking them to heart, letting them shape everything. Our thoughts, our decisions, our actions.
Exactly. It's about building our lives on the truth of the gospel. Because when the storms come, and they will come, that's what determines whether we stand or fall.
We all face storms in life, right? Illness, loss, disappointment, temptation. Those are the moments when our foundation is really tested.
It's true. And it's easy to get so caught up in the busyness of life that we end up building our lives on things that are shaky.
On our own desires and opinions.
Yeah. But Jesus calls us to something that lasts, something much more solid.
What about the Good Samaritan parable? What does that one teach us?
Well, it's a beautiful illustration of what it means to love your neighbor, even when that neighbor is someone you might consider an enemy.
Remember the setup. A Jewish man gets robbed, beaten, left for dead. A priest and a Levite. These are religious figures. They see him and keep walking. But then a Samaritan, someone who is considered an outsider, he stops to help.
It's a radical act of compassion and mercy, and it challenges our ideas of who deserves our love and who doesn't.
It's like Jesus is saying, don't just love the people who are easy to love. Love the people who are different, the people who have hurt you, the people who are on the fringes of society.
Exactly.
And it's more than just feeling compassion. The Samaritan actually does something. He takes care of the man's wounds, takes him to an inn, pays for him to stay there.
He puts his love into action.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that love isn't just a feeling. It's something you do. It's about living out your faith, helping people in need, even when it costs you something.
It's a powerful challenge for us today, too. I mean, we live in a world that's becoming more and more divided, where it's easy to ignore the suffering of others.
But Jesus is calling us to be different.
It is.
He's calling us to be like that Good Samaritan, to be the ones who show his love and compassion in a world that's hurting.
And that brings us to the last section of Luke 6, where Jesus ties all these teachings together in a powerful call to action.
All right, I'm ready for the grand finale. What does he say? So it all comes down to this one question, right? Are you just hearing the word, or are you actually doing something with it?
It's a good question, isn't it? I mean, it's easy to get caught up in how beautiful Jesus' teachings are, to feel all inspired. But then what?
Right. Does it actually change how we live?
Think about that parable of the two builders again.
Okay.
The one who builds on rock, the one who builds on sand.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just admire that house on the rock, to say, oh, wow, that's a strong house.
Right.
We have to build our own lives on that same solid foundation.
So we have to take those teachings, really let them sink in, and then put them into practice.
Exactly.
Even when it's hard. Even when it goes against what everyone else is doing.
It's about letting those words shape our thoughts, our choices, how we react to things. It's about aligning our lives with the truth of the gospel.
And that's what helps us through those tough times, right?
Right.
Because life throws some pretty crazy curveballs our way.
Definitely. Think about the things we've talked about already.
Right.
The Pharisees, so caught up in the rules, they missed the point about compassion, the challenge of loving our enemies, even when we just want to get back at them.
And that temptation to judge other people, to focus on their tiny flaws while ignoring our own big ones.
All of that, those are like storms in a way, challenges that can really shake us up.
They are. And that's where the doing comes in, right?
Yeah.
Because it's in the actual doing and living out Jesus' teachings. That's how we find strength. That's how we become resilient.
It's like those roots of a tree that go deep down. They help it stand strong, even in the wildest winds.
It's not about being passive. It takes effort, being intentional. It's a choice we make every day to line up our lives with God's will, to show his love and grace in real, concrete ways.
And it's not about being perfect. It's about making progress.
Right.
It's about taking those teachings and weaving them into our lives, bit by bit.
So where do we even start? What does this doing actually look like in everyday life?
It starts small. Choosing to be kind instead of critical, forgiving someone instead of holding a grudge, helping someone who needs it, even when it's inconvenient.
Those little things, those choices, they can make a big difference.
They can change our lives and the lives of the people around us.
Like that ripple effect we were talking about.
Yeah,
Every act of love, every time we choose to do the right thing, even the small stuff, it sends out these ripples of hope and healing.
it does. And as we practice these things, as we try to be doers of the word, something pretty amazing happens.
What's that?
We start to become living, breathing examples of Jesus' love and grace. We're like those cities on a hill, shining bright in a world that can be pretty dark sometimes.
I like that. It's a good reminder that we're not in this alone, right? We're part of something bigger.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of people who are trying to live out these teachings together.
Exactly. We can support each other, encourage each other, help each other stay on track.
We can learn from each other's wins and, yeah, even our mess-ups.
That's right.
And together, we can actually make a difference.
We can. It really boils down to, are you just listening or are you doing something about it?
Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
And, man, it makes you think, you know? It's easy to get all fired up by Jesus' teaching, to feel inspired, but, like, does it actually change anything?
Remember that parable about the two builders?
Yeah, the one with the houses.
Yeah, one builds on rock, one builds on sand.
Right.
It's not enough to just look at the house built on rock and be like, wow, that's a solid house.
Right, right.
We have to actually build our lives on that same strong foundation.
So taking those teachings, really getting them, and then actually putting them into practice.
Exactly.
Even when it's tough, even when it feels like you're going against the grain.
It's about letting those words change how we think, how we decide things, how we react to the world around us. It's about making our lives match up with what the gospel says.
And that's what helps us go through those difficult times, those storms. Life can throw some pretty crazy stuff at us, you know?
It can.
Like those things we were talking about.
Yeah.
The Pharisees, so focused on rules, they missed out on the whole compassion thing, loving our enemies, when every part of you just wants to retaliate.
Right.
And that urge to judge everyone else, focusing on their little mistakes while ignoring our own big ones.
Yeah, it's like those are all storms in a way.
They are.
Challenges that can really shake us to our core.
And that's where the doing comes in.
It does.
Because when we actually live out what Jesus taught, that's how we find strength.
It's like those deep roots of a tree, you know, holding it steady even in the strongest winds.
It's not about sitting back and doing nothing. It takes effort. It takes intention. It's a choice we make day after day to do what God wants, to show his love and his grace in real practical ways.
And it's not about reaching some level of perfection.
Right.
It's about progress. It's about taking what Jesus taught and making it part of who we are, step by step.
So how do we even begin? What does this doing look like in real life?
It starts with the little things. Choosing kindness over being critical, offering forgiveness instead of holding on to anger, helping someone who needs it, even when it's not convenient.
Those little things can make a big difference.
They can. They change us. They change the people around us.
It's like that ripple effect we were talking about earlier.
Right.
Every time we choose love, every time we do the right thing, even if it's small, it sends out those ripples of hope and healing.
It does. And as we keep practicing these things, as we keep trying to live out what we hear, something really amazing happens.
What happened?
We start to become living examples of Jesus's love and grace. We become like those cities on a hill, shining bright in a world that really needs that light.
That's beautiful. And it reminds us that we're not doing this alone. We're part of something bigger. All these people, all over, trying to live out these teachings together.
Exactly. We can support each other, encourage each other, keep each other on track.
We can learn from each other through the good stuff and, yeah, even from the mistakes.
It's all part of the journey.
And together, we can make a real difference.
We can.
Wow. This has been a deep dive, hasn't it? Started with this idea of just slowing down, savoring each word, and we ended up exploring what it really means to be a follower of Jesus.
From those Sabbath debates to blessings and woes to radical love and wise builders, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. But it all goes back to that one question: are we just hearers or are we doers?
That's the question.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a challenge. Take some time this week to think about everything we've talked about. What really stood out to you? What felt challenging? What's one small thing you can do this week to actually put these teachings into practice?
And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about progress. It's about making those daily choices to line our lives up with God's will, to be the ones showing His love and grace in a world that needs it so badly.
What a great way to end this deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through Luke chapter 6, verses 1 through 49. We hope you found it helpful and inspiring. Until next time, keep diving deep.